Welcome back to National Report. President Trump is currently trying to hash out a deal with House Republicans to get the big, beautiful bill over the finish line. One big agenda item expected to be part of the conversation is extending the tax cuts the president signed into law back in 2017. In an op-ed for Newsweek, Kansas Congressman Estes is making the case for how Trump is helping the U.S. to retake control of its own tax policy. He says the executive orders Trump signed already is making it possible for the U.S. to achieve this goal. And here on this Monday morning is Kansas Congressman Estes, live on the show. So thank you, sir, for being here.
Great, thank you. I appreciate being on.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive into it here. You say that President Trump and the tax cuts, that's the way to go to actually bring the U.S. to a strong economy. Right. Can you expand on that?
You know, we've got a lot. When we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, it was really intended to help make sure we got the economy going and we were able to get more salaries, more wages for U.S. workers and American workers. And it was wildly successful in that. We don't want to go back, so we're focusing on that now to extend those provisions that were temporary and make sure they move forward. At the same time, we're trying to fight off this international tax scheme that Secretary Yellen and the Biden administration came up, where they were going to help other countries take money out of the U.S. tax and the U.S. Treasury, and at the same time tax U.S. companies more. And so we want to make sure that we have good tax policy that helps pro-growth policies and helps families and helps people have more money in their pocket.
Well, that just sounds reasonable, right? Yeah. That's not too crazy. Let's dive into a little bit more of the op-ed here, and it takes a closer look at those international taxes that you had mentioned. Writing this, it is clear that the so-called undertaxed profit rule, an territorial tax that targets U.S. companies and their subsidiaries, is completely unacceptable. Equally offensive are the global anti-base erosion rules, which treat our non-refundable business credits unfavorably. So that was a lot of words, Congressman, and you say that very eloquently, but could you summarize that for us?
Yeah, really what the policy was that the President Biden and Secretary Yellen agreed to with other developed countries was that these countries could define what our tax policy should be, and if U.S. businesses weren't paying enough taxes in the United States, that they could come in and take part of that tax. And at the end of the day, U.S. businesses would pay more in taxes. That money would go into foreign countries as part of their tax collections instead of coming into the U.S. Treasury. So the U.S. Treasury would lose money up to $130 billion. It was one estimate by the Joint Committee on Taxation.
Well,
yeah.
Now's not the time to lose money.
No, it's not. Right. And we're trying to make sure that U.S. businesses are competitive, that they're able to be successful, that we help grow the economy and help provide jobs for Americans.
How do you square these permanent tax cuts that Republicans are working towards with the president's own tariff agenda?
You know, there's lots of discussions around tariffs right now. What part of what President Trump's been talking about tariffs is we need to have free and fair trade. And a lot of countries aren't doing that, whether they're using high tariffs on certain U.S. products or whether they're putting non-tariff barriers to that process. So the discussion is, how do we make sure that we don't disadvantage American companies through that process? And that's, we're trying to do all that together with different avenues. President Trump with the tariff discussion and the entire extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Yeah, more focus on American manufacturing, which is easier said than done. But can we bring it back to your home state of Kansas? Are you going to see a real-world impact of making things in America in Kansas?
It really will have a huge impact. You know, we've seen it today. We've seen a change in since some of these provisions started to expire in 2022. We've seen a drop in research and development expenditures. You know, it was growing at over 6.5% a year. Now it's growing at less than 0.5% a year because they're no longer able to write that off in the first year that they expend it. So they don't have the cash flow to manage that. As a result, jobs have been lost through that. So we need to make sure that we don't go backwards to where we were in 2017. We want to make sure that we're doing as many of these provisions permanent and going forward that we help the U.S. economy.
All right. You've got a short time between now and the midterms to make it all official with the GOP majority. That is Kansas Congressman Estes joining us. Thank you, sir, for coming in today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.